Hello and welcome to our sixth Threat Intel session today with Derek Buchanan on how to build a Threat Intel program. The Threat Intel series, the aim of it is to build up the expertise in the Cyber Ireland community around Threat Intel, and to do that through sharing of knowledge and experience from the Cyber Ireland membership. The group is going from strength to strength. This is our sixth session. We have it at the end of every month. We've over 300 people on our Threat Intel group mailing list so far, and we have over 90 people registered for today's webinar. Really interesting topic, which is how to build a Threat Intel program, which is going to go through insights into what to address when building a Threat Intel program. And we have Derek Buchanan from CrowdStrike, who's going to give us a presentation today. So I'm going to hand it over to the Threat Intel group lead, Owen Carroll, to introduce Derek.
Thanks, Owen. So welcome everybody today. Just to give a brief recap. So this is a zero to hero threat intelligence series. We've already done the first 4 introductory sessions, and now we're into the second session of the implementation phase, where we have Derek today. We'll have 2 more sessions in the implementation phase as well, in May and June. In May, we'll have Jamie Collier from FireEye coming in, and then we'll have Ishmael Valenzuela and Carlos Diaz from McAfee in June. At that point, we'll probably take a recap, where we'd like to get some feedback from the community, that's yourselves. So we'll probably send out a survey before we move on to the final phase, which is the more maturing phase. So we'll probably have around 3 sessions in that later in the year. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Derek. Derek is a very experienced threat intelligence researcher. He's a threat intel advisor for CrowdStrike, and he's worked across both the private and public sector. And I think he's going to give a really, really good practical insight from his own experience today. So thank you, Derek, and drive on.
Thanks, Joanne. Thanks for Cyber Ireland for inviting me today. So we're going to speak a little bit today about how to build a threat intel program. My name is Derek Buchanan, and I'm from the Strategical Threat Advisory Group at CrowdStrike. So we're going to do a little bit of agenda today, and we're going to talk about mens rea and threat intelligence. We're going to move across and then strategically move across to tactical, strategic and operational positioning, a little bit about the adversary, and then look a bit about metrics, as threat intel, arch enemy, metrics are your friend. And then we move across to QA, and I'll take your questions at the end of it. So where do I start? Where do we begin? We're in a complex state, and you're thinking about the threat intel program, and you're thinking, how do I get this to a point where I want it to be? Am I in line with my CISO strategy? Do I look at a multitude of different platform offerings that are out there? I know a lot about them, but what can we even afford? Can we cost? How do I track? What do I track? Do I track the landscape, or do I track the threats? What do I know about the vendors? Do they look at dark web? Do they look at surface? There's so many different things, and it's a large, broad spectrum of things to think about, and detection and automation that come into the context of a cocktail, which brings this uncertainty when it comes around threat intelligence, deriving value and stopping those threats. And so you're going to think about threat intelligence in the way as a funnel. You get the data, you get the collection, you get all the additional useful parts of the outputs, whether that's logs or whether that's a spike activity, but you want to push that in correlation with all your other parts of data so that it becomes useful. And so then you merge it, push it down, and start to then formulate an analysis, which is then where you kind of get the juice comes out with that automational piece, the decision-making, and the whole correlation where it's going to drive your intelligence strategy, drive your detection around the risks that you're facing, and formulate an actual decision on how you want to remediate and deal with a particular threat. When we start to think about threat intelligence, we start to move across and look at the intelligence cycle. And this is one of the most pivotal and important things and processes around how to deal with intelligence. It's a collection of detail in raw intelligence and looking at how it can be developed in a multitude of ways. And so you look at your positioning and how you do your initial planning, the first phase of the intelligence cycle. And you look at how you want to try and define your actual customer base. What is it that's important that the person wants or requesting? What is it that you're looking for, even if you're not the customer? And define that priority intelligence requirements and define exactly where exactly you want and what that's often called intelligence requirements from those PIRs. And then you start to look at how it's going to be able to be collected, because the collection phase is when it starts to bleed into where you want to look at all the data, the information that you're gaining, and all the data that's required to inform the array of sources that you might get it from. And so you want to understand whether these sources are likely to produce the desired information. And is it likely to be consumed in a way that's enabled you to be able to separate the signals from all the actual noise that's happening, because there's so much data around there, whether that's open source, closed source, which we'll speak about a little bit later. And then you move into the processing and analysis stage. These are very much around the context of the raw data being collated, fused, and also brought into the cycle of intelligence in the third phase of it. But it also brings together human and machine. These two are formally become one, and they're all geared to the intelligence requirements that's been set out in terms of the intelligence principles that you wanted to actually define. They come from both areas, so not just from the quantitative and qualitative, but also they can come with an array of different techniques. So it's not just being able to churn and burn from the whole and the automation piece, but also being a number of topical ranges of how you want to be able to define the accurate and the unbiased assessments that you want in order to be able to then present to get the actual juice from the squeeze in terms of the intelligence that you require. The dissemination piece is where then you start to look at where the disseminated intelligence is going to go. Who are you actually wanting the intelligence, and how is that going to help you? And this is ultimately going to define where the actual response of it goes. And so the listeners of it, in terms of when you actually get to that point of defining the intelligence where it's going, it shouldn't actually end. It should actually come back on a feedback loop. A number of organizations will also be able to stop that, and they continue to flow. It should flow. So you should be able, for example, take that out, fizz it back into an ISAC. It goes into an ISAC. You get more correlation about what the threats are being faced on a peripheral basis. And then you come back and bring it back again, and it fed that data that from there is fed back into the organization and resolves around in a cycle. But there's another cycle that you can use, which is the Freed model. And this is again another model which runs in tandem with the intelligence cycle, or can be a separate entity on its own. So you have find, the first letter. Find is the essential picking of the sentence, defining the who, what, where, when, and why questions that's being asked. And then looking at the fix elements of it, looking at the verification of the target, looking at this actual identifying the phase as to where the multiple different points that you want to get from, and then looking at the different types of evidence that you want to collect from. Then you've got the finish and the area where you want to gather and generate the actual phases from the previous two, and look at how you can try and impose that to bend it to your will. And then you want to be able to exploit it. Then look at to deconstruct the evidence and look at how you want to get to that end finish goal, and then kind of analyze the data that you're getting to exploit the evidence, look at the wider picture, and again, look at the way in which you can disseminate that. But they can run parallel in both, and you can utilize that in your incident response phase. So it's not, again, it's not something that is fine and dying. It's also can be run parallel. When we think about intelligence, the one thing you want to think about is it has to affect the decision-making process. Context is king, regardless as to whether you're looking at whether it's just a news article, and whether it's phishing domains or your own credentials. It has to define some sort of context, and it has to affect the decision-making process. It has to have some sort of action on your part as to what you're going to do with it. And that is key. And defining that as context, that is what is always going to be king. The first part of it is when you're trying to deal with your own program and think about where you're going to go, you start to look and think yourself. So what do you know about yourself? And try and discover where you are and what you've been, and looking at where you sit in the organization. So what is your role? We're all asked that today. What do we do? What is our actual role in the organization? And what am I protecting? These are the most definable questions. How well do you know your own products that are in place? And do you have visibility into your own environment? Can you understand that when you adopt new technologies, what are the processes involved in that? Where do I need to go to look at that? Does my IT and information security team have an incident response register that I can go and look up and look at the past threats that have happened and see, have we covered those gaps? Have we looked at those areas? And do we need to then nullify them again a bit further? And when we adopt new technologies, have we learned from that, where there's something been up to before which hasn't come to fruition, but we've learned from that and we've built in processes to affect that? And again, it's looking at the whole holistic picture and looking at what you can do in terms of your discovery. And the maturity. So when you look at your maturity, where do people and process and technology fit in? Where are they going to implement? What type of threat intelligence and where do they sit? Where do I sit in terms of all the different areas and the sources that we need to come to? Do we outsource our SOC? So do I need to speak to someone externally? Do I need to speak to, or do I have access to our data resources? Is that something that I have to get more information for? Is it something that we have on a free basis? Are we members of any particular ISACs? Do we have any written processes that are in stage, or do we have that at the moment? When you think about where you are in a level 1, you're looking at your entry level. You're looking at your premium threat intel advisors. You're looking at the different types of a la carte that you're getting in terms of how you can get those free intel feeds, and just looking at the area and the space that's out there. When you're looking at level 2, you start to become a bit more mature, and you're a little bit more in terms of the external inputs, but you're also defining what needs help and what's happening out there. And you can separate the noise from the actual creator of what's going on. But you're able to define the particular shift in the intel, and you're able to get more verification on the types of attacks or telemetry that you're seeing within your own environment. Level 3, you're pretty much flying. You're looking at the idea of being able to build on all the capabilities that you have, structured analysis, strategic analysis. Your operational maturity is somewhat scaling in terms of how you're inducted into all the different organizations, but you're able to create your own threat intel. You're on top of it, you've got reading measurements, you've got efficiency, you've got processes, and you've got a real structure and a lead and a pattern flow to leadership, which enables you to then start to look at threat actors, enables you to start to look at tracking them more on a strategical landscape, but also embeds you and pushes you more towards ISAC, so that sharing analysis and that level of maturity. And so what else is there? Well, there's level 4, and level 4 is unprecedented. You think that, most companies that in terms of threat intelligence, they're not always at that stage, but you think about the operational aspects, which is your flyers, the clear direct into C-level, kind of clear metrics, clear architectural changes, and they iterate into process. You have access to full adversaries, and you've got a whole lateral level of being able to detect new techniques. And the CISO itself, which essentially is your boss, you've got to think that you've got a large return on investment, and they've got the effectiveness to be able to show that they've got a threat intel program. But how many exercises does it run? How many times do you test your own security posture? And so there's tabletop exercises with frequencies. NIST 884 is one of the prime places for this. It gives you a cradle to grave strategies that are able to be able to show how you can emit it and be able to even implement the whole entire process from start to finish. Purple team and red team exercises, there are a number of different formats for those. So you've got likes of CBEST, TIBA, and you've got 853 again and 61, which will enable you to be able to implement that actively. Testing your incident response plan and being able to look at business continuity and show how they can merge into the likes of tabletop exercises to reinvigorate the organization. When we think about people, process, and technology, we look at the different types of risks, and we think about people automatically sometimes in cybersecurity as a risk, but that sometimes not is always the point. They are almost the initial attack vector based on their knowledge and their practices within an organization. And cyber criminals are likely to target those phishing emails, simply malicious links, half and stealing credentials. But it's a continual process, and it's a year-on-year thing where potential scams, especially if it's an organization that flurries and is quite vulnerable to those type of activities. And so when we start to think about this, how can we kind of situation and help those? We start to look at how we can think about implementing programs, just with the ideas of being able to look at a long-weighted structure and trying to mitigate those threats and produce some sort of hygiene. So we look at the entry of strong passwords, looking at being able to stop from clicking on malicious links and making those and mitigating from unfamiliar senders that we are not able to we shouldn't be receiving those particular phishing emails from. But again, it's being able to foster a culture and an ability to show that this is a type of security environment we want to do and make it safe for all our employees, and giving the least privilege to those that need access. Think about the processes. So you think about your incident response plan, and having a good incident response plan provides the organization with a repeatable process, something repeatable that you can do on a regular basis and isn't going to clog the system or be a bottleneck for when you have an incident. And ensuring that you think about all the different types of backups and be able to mitigate downtime when you have an event. These are the type of things when you think about that in terms of the process, but be able to formulate how your processes link into the security operations. When they have an incident, how do I fit in and what point do I fit in? Where is it that I need to be, and how do they fizz that information to me when I have clear visibility of it, so I can pivot back onto that particular type of incident and support that. These are the type of things that you want to be thinking about in terms of writing them up, making them easy for transparentable, because transparency breeds enhancement, and then being able to think about the likes of how you then ingrain with the likes of the technology that's been employed. Think about the different layers and defense in depth, and understanding those technologies and the security fabric of the organization and how it works, and how you're able to glean as much information from those particular areas and what you can glean from those. Again, that's something that's quite important. So when we look at the overall intelligence picture, we think about operationalize it. We think about the operational, strategical, and the tactical end of things. And so we think about, from a tactical front, being able to enhance our signatures, detection, being able to use human collaboration with that. This is where we fit in with the threat intelligence side of things, and running in tandem with your security operations. From an operational piece, you think about the large batches of data, the machine churn and burn, but again, it's being able to run in tandem with what you're seeing. Machines can't always understand the ability of what they believe to be context. They can derive based on learning patterns and be able to derive based on what they can actually detect on input, but obviously that needs that context. And this is where we come in to be able to form that. The strategical end of things, this is where it's breaking the board and being able to show the derived value of how much threat intel is going to pivot on the organization. And it's important and pivotal to be able to understand that from a strategical standpoint, a lot of strategic advisors, C-suite executives, they want to derive a lot from their threat intelligence. And they think about all the different levels. How many people didn't staff it? How many people didn't purchase? How many organizations? And we'll look at that a little bit more in terms of a granular level when we get to it. Think about some of the best practices in the threat intel in terms of the tactical intelligence, looking at the enhancement and the enrichment. And the idea is to enrich your defenses. So are you being able to see a lot of the malware that's being detected in the organization? Are you being alerted to it? What's that malware? Yeah. Is it automated? Is it something that's going to reduce time? Am I getting alerts going into my sandbox? I can see them, I can see enrichment, and I'm gaining context from that. I don't also need to keep bothering the SOC team because I'm able to have visibility of all threats. Can I map them and timeline them and show a whole implementation of that? And again, it's being able to see all of those areas, but also the different types of integration from other areas to bring together the cybersecurity system. And again, it's being able to have that alert that's going to be able to see you in terms of more visibility. The best practices from the operational side, when you think about the enablement and the common picture across the teams, that is one of the most pivotal points. Being able to talk to all the different areas and being able to have a common tongue, which is something that on a day-to-day basis. Do you have daily stand-ups with your teams? Do you able to talk and have a meeting across the board of all the things that you've seen on the areas in terms of the threats that you've seen in the last 24 hours? You know, do you all come together and have a huddle and have a threat intel meeting, or do you have a security or threat hunting meeting and you all define on all the threats that you've seen for the last 12 hours? Do you tap the logs and see what you've seen in the last 12 hours to define if that needs any type of activity that's illicit or malicious? Again, it's supporting the SOC, but again, it's built in onto the SOC to provide that efficiency and being able to support them and help protect the teams and address any particular emerging threats and provide that additional context and wrap around them like a blanket, which enables them to see and show exactly why you're deriving benefit. The strategical plan, the strategical ideas are all great and it's wonderful. And we have all these wonderful things about platforms and the wonderful people that we want to get and managers, but it all costs. The bottom line, it all costs. And when it comes down to the CISO, they're going to be looking at it and going, right, well, how much is this going to cost me, this new platform? How much is it going to cost me for this new member of staff? How much do I have to pay this junior analyst to run alongside you? Are you deriving any particular type of threat intel that I can feel is going to be a benefit to the organization? I mean, it's again, being able to show that you demonstrate the investment on the risks that you're seeing, especially the decisions that you're making, is going to be able to reinform and push them to give them an idea that you're getting the benefit from the threat intelligence you see. And when you think about the planning and equipment, think about the different, again, I talked about the platforms, there's a variance of out there that you can get. And that, are they going to derive from that? Are they going to give me what I want to protect against those future threats? And this will help you to make the bigger, better decisions. In the same way, it will help from a strategical standpoint. But am I going to have to sit there writing thousands of reports, which I know that my CISO needs to be able to give me I need to provide in terms of that, but also numbers to show the value. And the idea about all of this is it connects the dots. It connects the dots and provides everything together. And that's the whole idea is that we need to do, especially with threat intel, to have a good visibility of what's happened across the board, but also give an idea as to what's happening from that implementation and planning phase and how I need to think about where I'm going with this. So we look at what is it that actually connects us to all these threats? What is it that brings together around all these different areas that we need to be cognizant of? Well, when we think about that, we think about our source collection. And this is one of the biggest pieces when we think about where we get our data from. Like I said to you, there are a vast array of collection platforms out there. And there are so many that you tend to lose touch. You tend to not sure as to which one to pick. But they have so many threats to come from. You've got to think about the open and surface web. What do we know about your organization? It's so wide in terms of the product, but you want to know about the latest chatter, social media elements of things, the posts that are being made, malicious activity. Are they posting around your organization stating a particular person has access? Are they selling access? Is this happening on underground forums or marketplaces? Do you have visibility into those? And do you have visibility into what they're actually trying to sell as a whole network access? Are they selling RDP access, remote desktop protocol access? And all this data, you want to be able to think about how am I going to be able to bring it together and be able to show that it's going to derive value and also provide that additional metrics piece. Because I want to be able to automate it. I want to be able to put it into, MISP. I want to be able to put it into Threat Connector. I want to be able to put it into all the other variants of OpenSecurity, but the platforms that are about that actually want to derive this intel and churn and burn it for me. And so again, it's that element of being able to think about the automation and does it have an API access? There's also the cost around APIs. Some organizations and some places cost you for APIs. So it's a cost element to think about that element alone, about how you're utilizing it, and are you going to how you're going to have to start throttling it based on the set criteria. Some of APIs come with selection pieces, and some of them you have to define in terms of ticking to ensure that you're not taking too much data from the vendor to mitigate those costs. Information and sharing groups is another pivotal point. Very, very important, very, very dexterous. And so again, from the more sources, especially from your own in particular type of ISAC, you're able to glean a lot more picture from the telemetry that people are actually seeing. And so then you're able to see the reports, but you're also only able to interact. And a lot of the ISACs now, they have interaction through a lot of commercial communications. So you're able then to be able to derive that incident in terms of a lot faster and communicate with your peers in your community a lot quicker, especially if there's something that you're observing and you want to be able to gain some additional latent context around that. But then when you think about all the different questions that come up, there's an array. Like, how many wide range of sources do I collect from? And does it track threat actors? And do I have to get it? How timely is it? Is it 4 hours? Is it 12 hours? Am I likely to get domains 12 hours, 24 hours later? Have I measured it against another type of tool? I don't care about adversaries, but I need to care about the threats. So the threats, what can I do with those? Are they real threats, or is it just threats that are reported in open source? And what format is it going to come in? Is it going to be sticks or taxi? Can I ingest it into feeds? Is it going to be JSON? Is it going to help me with the likes of MITRE and a Navigator? So again, there's a number of different elements to think about in terms of all the areas and where you want to bring it to. The evaluation of the tool, has it actually been successful in other organizations? And like the peers that you've spoken to, that you've had this particular tool and they've thought that it may not derive the value that you expect. So again, it's also speaking to the community and getting that whole holistic picture as to what you can actually do and what you can actually get from this types of source collection. It's one of the most pivotal points, because without it, you're not going to have the visibility that you require or gain the initial context. And depending on the type of sources that you collect, it will save you a lot of time. Well, the adversary. I mean, on the other end of these attacks, there is always a human being, and there's no different from any place. And when we think about where they all are, they're in a number of different states, and they all fit in a number of boxes. It's going to be either different types of nation state or e-crime or activism. But you want to be able to think about where it fits to you and how does this relate to me? And I need to be able to bring that together. and how I'm going to be able to relevate that. And so again, one of the things that you can pick up for a number of different videos and all and different conferences out there. You can pick up, especially from like Cyber Island, you can learn about intent and scoring, mapping threat actors, and not to the point of where you have to do it at a micro level, but being able to see where you stand with this particular adversary or actor. So look at scoring and pivotal points, look at their motivation. So are they likely to target my industry or sector? 1 point. Are they likely to target my country, or are they like industry or vertical? 2 or 3 points. Look at the adversarial capabilities. Are they going to be a low level or enterprise level or adversary level? So you can start to peer the points there. When were they last active? In the last 1 to 6 months, 3 to 6 months to a year to 2 months. And then you can apply a scoring around that, which will be able then to sort of derive how important that is to you. And all of the actors that you've listed and you've picked out as relevant to you, you can derive on their importance. And that's quite good, especially when it comes to the likes of exploiting vulnerabilities, because you can add that on as a particular tag and say, well, does this particular actor exploit vulnerabilities right now? And are they exploiting anything to do with our organization? And then you can apply a scoring around that. And is the vulnerability 1 to 6 months old, a year old? Then you can kind of apply more scoring. So you can continually monitor these adversaries at a basic level and gain a bit more insight into what's actually happening here. The measurement, again, and the metrics. It's always going to be about metrics. It's, threat intelligence and metrics is something that's always a contentious word and how it kind of sits, but it's one of the things that will help you derive and show value when it comes to the level of your executives and CISOs. So when you think about the organization as a whole, just you're thinking about the implementation, have a think about the likes of the model that's been put before you. You know what the organization mission, vision, and values are, but what's your strategical strategies for security? What's that? Then you can kind of look at what that might be. You could kind of look, well, maintain compliance, look and protect the organization from brand, look at protect vulnerabilities, look at protecting for the likes of executives. And all these things will start to become important for your CTI strategy. And then you can kind of go on to there to define roles and responsibilities. But what you can then do is granular go that little bit further and assign codes to each one of those areas. And then you're able to define and count on those areas that you've actually dealt with on a regular basis. And these can be fed into ticket systems. These ticket systems are there for those, so you can define that particular tag to those areas and be able to get those derived numbers. And then it creates a link for a dashboard for your CISO. So they can look at it and they can see what you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. They don't have to worry about it. And you'll kind of be left alone to actually get on with it. Again, this is one of the most pivotal points of being able to define your role and knowing who you are and knowing what you're supposed to be doing as a threat intel implementation practitioner. When you look at the departments and the interaction that you do and think about who you interact with, think about all the different services that would likely to use your products as a whole and who you're protecting. You're protecting the brand. So are you going to protect, are you going to with the marketing team? Are you protecting the different types of network teams? So you're going to integrate with those. Are you likely to engage with security operations? Are you likely to go to IT? So all of these particular areas, you can define what your role is with all of these areas and apply references to them. So each individual area has their own reference. And for every engagement or every response or every single remediation or a ticket or any particular type of activity that you carried out, you can employ a reference and a number reference for each one, an account. And if for each count, you then simply get a scoring. And at the end of the month, you may have a number of different engagements. So it may be that you've engaged with security operations a lot more. So over the last month, there have been 300 incidents that you've engaged with security for, and they've remediated 100 of them. And as a result of those, 20 of them have been involved where they've actually involved an actual incident response process and had some beneficial impact on the incident response policy. So those type of things kind of provide and derive value, show the correlation of where you can get threat intel into your implementation of your program and thinking about where you might derive that value. When we think about feeds, and I've mentioned open source feeds and deep dark web feeds, it's again about being able to reiterate how fast you're getting that data. So you think about the timeliness of it. So how useful is it? Is it useful for proactive detection? So you can define particular areas, and you can think about utilizing it as a whole aspect of mantra. You can think about the accuracy, trustworthy of it. Is it creating just too much noise, false positives, alarms are going off everywhere? Is it giving me names detected based on the company name, but it's just picking up all open source data and there's no validation behind it? So I need to stop that. Is that something that I can do? How would I go around that? How is the platform doing that? What is it that it's doing? Well, it's giving me loads of data based on this open source name, but not giving me actual things. And that really needs to be tuned. So you might need to mention that in cooperation or with tandem with something else. So then that starts to move into the accuracy. So then you start to look at the ease of use. So how easy to use a lot of these particular feeds? Again, the trustworthy and the false positive, but also the expertise. Do I need somebody else to help me with my tool workflow? If I'm onboarding or onboarding logs, do I need that additional engineer? And do I need to spend too much time on it? And how good is it? So you can score it as a poor, you can score it as an excellent, and derive based on its detection and how speciality that is needed. It can then enhance for training and then can support you there. How much data is it providing? Is it just too much volume? And so again, you've got to think about, is it going to give me a lot of information? Is it just a social bombard and I'm not going to touch it because you get alert fatigue and then you'll walk away? And that's one of the things with threat intelligence. We get too much noise, and most analysts that do get into that point, they walk away because they get alert fatigue and it's just too much alarm bells going off and you want to take a break from it. And then you probably won't touch the platform, not because of the fact you don't love the platform, it's because of the fact that it's bringing up too much noise. So it might be time to go away, have a cup of tea, return back, sit down at the platform, and then derive a bit more in terms of how you can then utilize that data in another way to get the derived value that you want. And how complete is it? So you think about the completeness of it, the sufficiency in detection, but you also think about the effective proactiveness. So again, like areas such as like GitHub repositories, is that going to give me the derived value that I need? And the different types of exportation in terms of aspects of capability. So do I need to use sticks and tags? Is it open indicators? Do I need to use YARA rules, or can I get it for exporting JSON? Do I have to export in PCAP files? Again, all these areas are going to bleed into your whole feed evaluation. And is it attributing to one of the areas that are strategical, operational, and tactical? All of this provides significant relevance. And if you apply measurements to all three, you can actually score those again and provide yourself with a number of ways that you can actually mitigate those threats. When we think about vulnerabilities, and we think about it's a lot to think about, and there are a number of ways. And one of the ways in which is OSF Metrics. It's a quite in-depth website, very, very good. If you first come out for threat intelligence, it's one of the things that I first used when I first started to look at how to model with threat intel and vulnerability detection. It's one of the most scourges, and there are a number of roles that are separate to that. But when you think about the different types of elements of here, you think about the damage and the potential scoring. So you think about, how easy is it in terms of damage? What is it going to affect? If compromised or denied, what's going to happen? How easy to get to, and the reliability to exploit that. Is that going to be something that's likely to affect the organization? And you can score these modules based on that. The exploitability, how difficult is it to exploit this particular vulnerability? And you can apply modules around that again to be able to exploit the way in which you can utilize that, and then you can pivot that to get a scoring. And then you can look at the different types of affected areas and see if those are likely to be a given. So is it a given effect on a project? It's not affecting a project. Is it affecting users? So all these areas, again, is going to derive efficiency and be able to use that and score it. But then what about the discoverability? So discoverability is kind of like looking at the threats and learning about it. And how hard is it to detect? Is it something that's really, really granular and privileged access sort of that type of thing? Or is it going to be able to access source code or running systems or processes? And this is going to be able to give you a complete holistic picture. And can you detect it based on your network telemetry? Can you detect it if there's likely to see those type of changes? Do you have an endpoint solution? So again, it's those areas that's going to provide value, but you're going to be able to score those. And you can look at the way in which you can move those, and you can take the scoring and you can divide it by 5 and then look at a potential fix. And that again is another way to then apply a vulnerability implementation in terms of how you can utilize it for your threat intel capability to bolt it on. So metrics.
Derek, just a quick one. We're actually running tight in time there, literally, just so you know, we're up against 1 o'clock.
Yeah, so I mean, metrics are your friend. It is your friend, and being able to give you a lot of value and being able to give you a lot of aspect of things. But you think about all the log correlations and the entities and how you can utilize that, and think about the ability in which you're able to utilize it. All the different use cases that you can have and all the different areas that you can utilize threat intelligence, and just give yourself that whole holistic picture of the areas that would be able to benefit from threat intelligence. And you think about why you're going to have it. Well, it's going to give you knowledge, it's going to give you insight, it's going to give you visibility, it's going to give you foresight, but it's also going to give you an effective response plan and be able to give you that ability to stand up. So on the back of that, is there any kind of questions around threat intelligence and the areas that are discussed today?
Hey, Derek, thanks for that. That was great. There was just one question: would this be recorded and shared? And just to let everybody know, it will be like all the other sessions. We will be sharing this. We don't actually have any other questions right now, but one question I asked, Derek. So first of all, just thank you for presenting today. It was really great insight. But if I'm somebody that comes to you and I don't have threat intelligence, right, and I ask the question, well, why would I need threat intelligence? And then maybe, how would I justify going to the executives or the board to actually put the threat intelligence program in place?
I think that when you look at a lot of organizations, they struggle to try and prove that threat intelligence is going to drive value, and it's being able to show the benefit. And so there are a lot of organizations out there and vendors that will provide test cases, and you can look up a lot of courses. There's a lot of training. That's an initial stage just to get a very basic around what threat intelligence is and how you can enhance your knowledge around it. And then you can think about the elements of all your understanding of your own particular environment. Like I said to you before, just getting a whole holistic view of what you can do and the threats that your companies face. So if you're a bank, then it's likely to be financial numbers, it's likely to be credit card, likely to be ATM. And then those are important, but then it's also adversaries who's likely to target those organizations. And those things are trying to be important. So it's, again, asking the question to executive, is that an important thing for this organization to be protected against? And more than often not, most will say, yes, it is.
Okay, thanks, Derek. I think we're running tight in time. So I'm just going to finish up just by thanking Derek for his presentation today. It was really great. And just to kind of let everybody know, for the next session, it's going to be Jamie Collier from Byron Mandiant. He's going to speak about his pathway to a successful threat intelligence function. So he's going to go pretty deep on critical components of a successful CTI function. He's also going to talk about a MITRE attack mapping, so building on what we did in some of the introductory sessions, and then YAR rules to improve security outcomes. And he's also going to talk about utilizing intelligence and cyber risk. So that's a really good session as well next month. So I'd just like to thank everybody for your attendance today. And Derek, that was really great. And thanks for your insight.
No, thank you very much for inviting. Thank you very much.